mentioned, just wanted to also ask you about some of the film scholars who were based in Baltimore at that time. You mentioned Thomas Cripps and Leo Brody.
Yeah, well, he was at Hopkins for a few years, and yeah, Tom Cripps. I learned so many great film stories from Tom Cripps. I mean, he was like one of the big experts on black film. He wrote. It was two films. One was. I can't remember that they were put out by Oxford University Press. One went to 1942. One went into the 60s, and they were really well researched. And he knew all this stuff, and he would talk, and he wrote lots of other stuff besides those two books. He's been retired I don't know how many years now, but I always enjoyed seeing him because he would bring up stories. The only thing is, he told me that when he was a teenager, that he and his friends laughed "It's a Wonderful Life" off the screen. And I love "It's a Wonderful Life." But that's one of his things I remember. But and he's another one like Dick Maxey, who really loves just going to films. You know, it's like another one that I met. He's not from Hopkins, but he's spoken at Hopkins, and I've heard him at the National Gallery. He's one of my favorite film writers, because for a scholar, he writes really well, is David Bordwell. And I've heard him speak a couple of times. I remember once at Hopkins he spoke. It's the only time I couldn't figure out what he was talking about because it was extremely theoretical, and usually he made, in his book on ozone and stuff, he explains things fairly well. But I don't know what this talk was on, but afterwards there was a reception, and he was just a film fan just like anybody else. I love that. But I read his blog. It's one of the better blogs, he and his wife. But I've known some of the professors at Towson. Some of them are probably retired. I think Greg Fowler's still around. A lot of them, when they first came to Baltimore, they came to the library to check out the films. That's how I met them. I think Peter Lev is retired. He was at Towson. All of a sudden I'm going blank. And a bunch of them at UMBC, I met a lot of them because they came into the library. There were a couple other names that were on the list for when Harvey ran the thing, but I didn't know them. He taught art at Goucher. I think his name was Lincoln. I can't remember his last name. I just thought, because I didn't really know him, although I remember it was the first time I ever saw a Miklos Jansko film, a Hungarian director. It was Red Psalm, which the whole film is like 5 long shots. And he introduced it, and I don't think I stayed awake through it the first time. But the same thing happened for La Ventura. That's why you have to see a film more than once, because I love La Ventura. It gets better each time I see it. But I always give a film a second chance. I've even given Gone with the Wind more than one chance. I don't like Gone with the Wind. But those are some of the... I'm trying to think, because we didn't have film courses as such at Hopkins when I was there. I'm trying to remember. I did take when I was in library school, I took a good Hitchcock course from, and he's written several books. He's still around. It's funny, back then he looked sort of like Martin Scorsese and was a little scary. I'm trying to remember his name all of a sudden. But he wrote a bunch of books on foreign films and stuff. You'll have to dub me in later. But then I met him years later, and he didn't remind me of Martin Scorsese. He might reminded me of Leonard Maltin. Like, he really changed over the years. His name is the same as somebody in the symphony. Oh, Kolker. Robert Kolker is his name. because I think there was somebody in the symphony named Kolker. He was a good teacher. I loved the Hitchcock course. I used to go down to the library. I went down to the Library of Congress to screen some things that weren't available at the time, like Rope. I think Rope and Rear Window I saw down there because it was before they were re-released. And that was the one film course I got to take at University of Maryland. Yeah, there just weren't many courses around when I was in college. I mean, it wasn't just Hopkins. It was, it was NYU, and it was some of the other. I did apply to NYU. I don't think I wouldn't have made it in the film department at NYU. I'm just so non-competitive. But I got accepted, but they didn't give me money, and Hopkins did, so I wound up staying here. But that would have been a real change in my life, being up in New York. I don't know how I would have managed, but still love New York. But I can't think of any other professors. I still can't remember that last name of that Lincoln guy. It's like